Good evening. Welcome to the American Academy. My name is R.J. McGill. I'm the head of communications here at the Academy and the editor of our Berlin Journal. Thanks for joining us for tonight's Mercedes-Benz lecture, Why Graphic Novels or Comics Are No Joke. Now, I've been told that means that there will be nothing funny tonight, so there's no laughing involved at all. So behave yourselves, please. But because we're in Germany, Spaß beiseite, tonight's lecture may be regarded as an early celebration of the German publication of Einstein in Kafkaland, or in German, Einstein in Kafkaland. Translated by...
My translator's here. So
thank you. By Nadine Puschel, who is here in the audience. Great translation, by the way. Can barely tell the difference. Ken's latest graphic novel will be published by Kiona on March 18th. I don't know if I said that right. Kiona. Apologies. On March 18th, and we already have copies outside for you to purchase and have signed. The former is a prerequisite for the latter. But first, I'm going to say a few words about the fellowship Ken has and about Ken just briefly, and then I will hand over the floor to the main act. The American Academy in Berlin's Mercedes-Benz Fellowship was started in the academic year 2000-2001 as the Daimler-Benz Fellowship. Few things happened in between there, and it was renamed the Mercedes-Benz Fellowship in 2022. We're grateful to Mercedes-Benz AG for their continued support over the past 25 years and for their generous endowment of this fellowship, and we're especially grateful to trustee and honorary chairman of the Mercedes-Benz Group Supervisory Board, Manfred Bishop, who's been a trustee at the Academy for a very long time, and we thank him for his long-standing support. Previous Daimler or Mercedes fellows have included legal expert Joshua Sellers of Arizona State University, who examined when he was here the law of democracy and racial equity, and Stuart Kirsch, who was here just, I think, about 2 years ago, an anthropologist from the University of Michigan, who looked at methods of accounting and the measurement of greenhouse gas emissions. So, Ken, it's going to be interesting how you measure up to those very serious topics.
Accounting is my strength.
And now to Ken's strengths. Comics. We're here to talk about comics. Ken is an author and a graphic novelist based in Evanston, Illinois. He received his BA in history at Grinnell College and a master's degree in journalism from Northwestern. He was creative director, I did not know this at all, at the advertising agencies Ogilvy and McCann for 30 years, which means you started when you were 5, I guess, roughly.
Thank you.
He's perhaps best known for his hilarious cartoons in The New Yorker and for those in National Lampoon, The Wall Street Journal, and The New York Times Book Review, among many others. He's the author of 3 graphic nonfiction biographies, as well as Fetch Can, Jewish Cartoons, which was followed by the critically acclaimed 3 Escapes of Hannah Arendt, A Tyranny of Truth in 2018. And that book was translated into German, French, Italian, Spanish, Czech, Portuguese, Korean, Japanese, and Russian, and Chinese coming up, and will be adapted into a stage play at the Deutsches Theater. And relevantly to Deutsches Theater, the head of dramaturgy at Deutsches Theater, Carla Meda, is with us tonight, I think working with Ken, but I don't want to give away anything that I don't know for sure. So have fun talking. Krimstein's Hannah Arendt's 3 Escapes was followed by When I Grow Up, the lost autobiographies of 6 Yiddish teens, and of course Einstein in Kafkaland, also in German, out just last year. Ken's current project, which he's working on here at the Academy, focuses on his native town of Deerfield, Illinois, and its buried mid-20th century past. A few housekeeping remarks before I get out of here. Ken will speak for about 30 minutes, then we'll go on stage, and I have a few questions just initially, and then we'll open it up to the floor. If you're here in the room, just raise your hand. A microphone will find you. If you're joining us via the live stream, type your questions into the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them. We apologize in advance if that's not possible. And without further ado, Mr. Ken Krimstein, the floor is yours to discuss methods of accounting and the measurement of greenhouse gas emissions.
When is tax day again? Okay, here we go. I would like to thank everybody here at the Academy. They've been incredible, all my fellow fellas and all the important people who are here, and Mercedes-Benz for making those cool cars. Let me get this thing going. So this is going to be kind of what I do, how I do it, and why it matters. And I want to dedicate this to my friend, mentor, and all-around curmudgeon who recently left us, Sam Gross, a great man and a great cartoonist and not bad-looking guy. Said to me once in his gruff voice, "Ken, you're a cartoonist. Cartoonists knew everything." So blame him. So what do I do? What do I do? I don't know. But thankfully, neither does anybody else. Well, you could say I make graphic novels, maybe comics. How about nonfiction graphic narratives? Oh, it's drawn literature. How about drawn literature and history and biography and cartoons? Manga. Fumetti. Bildgeschichte. Sorry about that. Kind of lively. Now, I know what a New Yorker cartoon is. For example, a drawing and a caption. A caption and a drawing. Sorry to any, no Scottish people were harmed in the making of that cartoon. A drawing and a caption. Okay, so that's how I cut my teeth. But what do you call this? A 240-page story based on 2 years of research about, at least in America, an obscure German woman philosopher who coined the phrase banality of evil that shows how the events of her life defined her thinking by using drawings and words and the color green. When I tell people what I do, and then I made a graphic biography of Hannah Arendt, this is what they picture. Houston, we have a problem. Even though I'm trying to open up the truth of the past, somehow when the product that I make sees the light of day, on one side, I'm a super important, weighty missive that defines the very reaches and extent of human capabilities, versus I'm funny pictures. I don't know, how about calling it this? An unput-downable story that uses words and pictures to make something that means something. As my wife told me, that was a little clumsy and it wouldn't fit on a bookstore tag. It's a problem. Well, I was in France, pardon me, and they have these stores everywhere, bande dessinée, BD Spirit, BD. And it's somehow the bande dessinée felt better. You know, hell, if Americans can embrace Beaujolais Nouveau, they can certainly swallow BD. So that's what I make. And the interesting thing is, even in this little neighborhood we were at, on a Sunday morning at like 9:30, the bande dessinée store was crowded with people buying bande dessinée about the theft of the Mona Lisa and all these very interesting things. So for now, we'll call it bande dessinée. So how do I do it? How do I make these books? I vulgarize history. Whether it's fiction, nonfiction, essay, reportage, you name it. Now, how can I prove this to you? This is a true incident that happened at a bookstore in France. I was signing some books, and this woman came up to me and she said, "You are the vulgarizer of history." No, no. In French, vulgariser is good. Bon. It means to make complex stories clear and understandable. Oh, I knew that. Like hell I did. I always wanted to use a pointer. Uh-oh, please work. Please work. Yeah. So here are 7 things that I've learned about vulgarizing history. 1, geography is destiny. Where we are in space and time determines what we do and what happens. So I go there. I go there to see how the light falls and how the wind blows. Whether it's Vilna, the Upper West Side, I was there for a long time, Prague. And you can see here Kafka's office then, Kafka's office now. Still there, a little different. Einstein's office. I needed to go see Einstein's office because it's an important part of his biography. And there it is. I had to visit the Prague train station because it was a very, very important part of the story. And then I imagined Albert Einstein stepping out of the train and arriving in Prague, because the book Einstein in Kafkaland is about a lost year, pretty much, when Einstein and Kafka rubbed shoulders, 1911 and 1912. And they were nothings. They were nobodies. This comes directly from the woman who runs the Einstein archives at Caltech. He was a nobody. And I had to see all the places that they were. And I realized when I was there that the real reason that I went to Prague was actually to get to Zurich and to take the very same train that Einstein and his family took. It was very, very important for me to feel what that was. So next thing you know, there I am with my Walter Benjamin t-shirt. And there is the Zurich Grand train station. And here is me doing a sketch of the station with an imagination of Einstein with his cigar and his wife and his 2 kids. Although it was so early in the process, I didn't realize that his youngest kid was only 1, so he wouldn't have been doing that. But it gave me the idea for how the drawing. And then I got on the train. All aboard. So this is a bit of chapter 1, and you can see how the train worked. Down the rabbit hole, and note the date, April 1st. You can't make that up. We're late. We're late. Albert, tell me again, why? Why what? Why we're moving to that Middle European madhouse? Why we're leaving great chocolate? Why we're leaving our home, your laboratories, Tete's kindergarten, our friends? Oh, Prague's going to be great. Prague chocolate is amazing. Listen to what the guidebook says and notice it's the Baedeker. I actually found the 1911 Baedeker of Praha. And his wife responds, "Oh yeah? What does it say about the bedbugs and the anti-Semites and the anti-Serbs clogging Prague? Albert, give me one good reason we're moving." Mileva, I've got 8,672 reasons, each one an Austrian crown. And that was Einstein's salary, which was double what he was making in Switzerland. Now, the story, for those of you who want to read it, is narrated, as one would expect, by a 600-year-old skeleton on the astronomical clock in Prague who saw it all. 100 kilometers later, Papa, look. Every time I throw my ball up, it lands right back in my hand. But when it's not attached to me, shouldn't it fly backwards? Shouldn't it fly back and smack me in the face? How does the ball know to fall back into my hand? Albert, I think this calls for a Gedanken experiment. What's that, Mama? It's when you imagine something. See Papa's imaginary ball? No. Look harder, Hans. Oh, okay, I see it now. Now toss it so high it goes through the roof. But it can't. Try. Papa, look, my ball keeps going up and up and up. And here's the skeleton. As the train plunges into the tunnel, Albert feels like he's falling down a very deep well. There's a little analogy to Alice down the rabbit hole. And then the train blasts out of the tunnel, and Hansi's Gedankenball falls back into his hand, and Albert finds himself back in his seat. Papa, I don't get it. How did the ball know? Albert, we're in Prague, and I'm still not happy. When I solve gravity, everything will be back to normal. You recognize that drawing. Or will it? I don't know if I'm moving forward or backward. And a sneaky person is walking by, witnessing it all. And there's Hans throwing his ball. Number 2, if you want to be a vulgarizer of history, keep an eye out for scenes, because scenes make scenes. This is the Café Louvre, where Einstein and Kafka and Max Brod and the Brentano crew hung out. There's a waiter. There's a cafe in Paris. Cafe culture, as you all know, was a very, very big deal. Here's the Cedar Tavern, some of the habitués, ignoring the no smoking. And this is where Hannah Arendt spent a lot of time with the New York intellectuals. There's a scene that I write about in a couple of books just down the road from here. Not the KFC, the Café Romaniche, which is where the KFC was in the Europa Center. And just an incredible environment, which I have now kind of become obsessed with, and I'm starting to do little drawings and paintings of the people who went there. Number 3, if you want to be a vulgarizer, is faces are places. So here's how I found my Hannah, because, you know, if you're reading a book with just words, you imagine the person. I have to actually find what this person is going to look like. Oops. So there's Hannah. Sorry, I referred to her by her first name. I got to spend a lot of time with her. Typical, she looks like she's in upstate New York, smoking a cigarette, kind of tough. You'd be surprised, although very photogenic person, not tons of pictures of her, maybe 40. So I thought, oh, okay. Hated it more. Really, no. Oh, there she is, younger. I mentioned this to someone. She's got kind of a groovy Himalayan-looking necklace. The cigarette, ever present after age 7, is just off frame. But this is when she was at university in Marburg. You kind of see why she attracted attention. Here she is, even younger. Oh my goodness gracious. What? Something happened, but we'll get it back. There she is. High school girl, kind of jaunty with that little leg up, leaning, very attractive. Horrid. I mean, what was wrong? I could not find how to draw this person. So I keep looking, and there is her immigration and naturalization paper from the US. You see her name was Johanna Blucher. She had married again. And not a bad picture, considering it's a scan of a fax of a driver's license photograph. I mean, not bad. So, now I'm starting to get somewhere. But I still didn't love it. I still wasn't there. And then, thanks to the fact that librarians in France never throw anything away, this popped up on the internet. Hannah's library card from the bibliothèque. You can see December 14, 1939. And wow, that picture had never been seen since 1939. And that was my Hannah. And I knew enough about her at that time that I can understand why she looked so tired. Because she was working on getting children out of France. She was working next to Walter Benjamin at the Bibliothèque Nationale. She had her new fiance / husband living in the apartment with her and her mother. There's a lot. But that was my Hannah. And here she is at the library, and you can see I love Goethe there etched into the into the thing. And here she is as kind of a young flapper in Königsberg, because she was. Okay, number 4, color has meaning. A problem or opportunity, we should say, that I had was that necessity dictated that I pick one overriding color for each work. Necessity being, we don't have the money to print it in 4 colors, so pick one. But that color has to mean the right thing, because color is loaded with meaning. How do I pick it? And what do I do? Well, with Hannah Arendt, I did some reading and found out she was often referred to as the woman in green. She favored the color green. So that was it. And that was actually the color swatch that we picked. Interestingly, although I felt that green was a good color for her, afterward, I did a book launch with Roz Chast. She and I were together doing this launch. And in the green room, she said to me, "Ken, really? Green?" I'm like, what do you mean? She said, "Green is the worst color to work with." I'm like, "Why didn't you tell me that before I started?" But I also thought that there was a reason that green would work for Hannah Arendt. One of the things that I learned a lot about her philosophy was she believes in this thing called natality, making up new stuff. She thinks that that is what makes us us. So I thought, oh, spring, green. But then this was interesting. I was doing a talk and someone raised their hand and said, green is also the color of decay in flesh. And strangely, that worked for Hannah too. So I felt that green was right, and it seemed to work. My second book about lost, what I call Yiddishawanian teens, what was I going to do? What color could I do for them? And I have to say, I was kind of sick of green at this point. So I thought orange, it's kind of an in-between color, and it can also work very well for sort of sky, and it can also be kind of scary, like fire, and it can allow you to do faces, which was something that I was really missing. But it also, I transcribed Yiddish writing into my own handwriting, but so it's orange. And what about Einstein and Kafka and Mad King Rudolph II? He gets a mention. It's a blue. And again, I had to feel it. Oh, dumb thing. Come on. I sort of felt it. It kind of made sense, the sky. And then I found out one of Einstein's little-known contributions to the world of science is, and I know we have some experts here, real experts, but Susan, forgive me if I'm getting this wrong. He kind of wrote a paper that said, "Why is the sky blue?" I don't know. We're not seeing any shaking the head, no. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. And also blue, in this particular book, I mixed the blue with black. So it became kind of a teal. Okay, number 5, use contemporary lingo. To vulgarize history, I want as little distance between the characters and the audience as possible. So I translate, when necessary, their old-fashioned dialogue into common speak without losing the essence of their thoughts and feelings. Of course, if as often as possible, I use their own words, but if it's very archaic, I won't. So here's an example from one of the chapters in the When I Grow Up book. I call it The Boy Who Liked a Girl. Now, one of the things about the teens in this book, I got this idea. The New York Times ran an article about these lost autobiographies that were found when they were cleaning out a church in Vilnius. And they were all written in Yiddish. And actually, when they found them, they didn't even know what language it was. So they called the library, and the library called YIVO in New York, and they said, oh my God. So these were part of an ethnographic study. And in order to get true comments from teenagers, they said, you don't have to put your name in it. We'll do a code. So we don't know the names. You'll note in this story, he refers to his girlfriend as M. And here she comes. It took a long time for me to get used to listening to M talk, but I finally figured out how to be both interested and not interested at the same time. I just answer one word in 10. That seemed to work. Now that actually came right out of his mouth. And that's what attracted me to it. These are us. Them's is us. And amazingly, as I started to get to know her better, I started to like her. M's character was what I can only describe as noble, and she was beautiful. So beautiful. M and I often went out into the woods. Everybody hung out there. No question, M and I developed a relationship that could have become something truly important. But something happened that tore us apart and led us to forget about each other for a long, long time. Footnotes. I like to use footnotes and captions. That annoys a lot of people. They have to pull out magnifying glasses. It's a little mania of mine, and maybe it's because I was so annoyed by David Foster Wallace's writing that I felt I would revenge and do more than him. But they allow me to put my voice in there and to break the fourth wall and to amp up the knowledge and the humor. Here's an example from the Einstein and Kafka land. Chapter 2, The Pool of Tears. Again, another reference to Alice in Wonderland. And Kafka, I found out, was a compulsive, besides being a vegan, a compulsive lap swimmer. He swam every morning. And you can see of all mankind's ailments, and there's the skeleton became the clock. Of all mankind's ailments, insomnia is the most horrible. Eyes wide open, each tick of the clock, a cannon blast, tick, 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 until dawn finally sorrowfully breaks. And if insomnia were an Olympic event, Franz Kafka would be its Michael Phelps. As he does most mornings, a bleary-eyed Kafka heads to Prague's civilian swimming pool, and there's an asterisk, to swim laps with his best friend and literary gadfly, Max Brod. And here's the caption regarding the pool, where as a child he used to swim daily with his father, Herman, one of his scarce happy memories of him. And then the footnote for Max Brod, 1884-1968, German-speaking Prague author, composer, and journalist. Although prolific and talented, he is mostly remembered as Kafka's best friend. I actually like some of his books. Finally, if you want to do this, let me just tell you, weirder works. Somehow, even readers who say they never read one of those before get it. So here's an example, another example from the Hannah book. I call it Walter Stain, 1959. And she's referring here, it's in her first person, and she's referring to, she's just published in America, Origins of Totalitarianism, which became a very big hit. She became kind of a celeb. Origins lets us move uptown to a much nicer 5-room, 2-bath apartment in a doorman building with an elevator and partial river views. I know this because on my sojourn, I found the building and looked at it. It is from here that I decide to set up camp in my efforts to crack why the abyss happens. The abyss meaning before and after the events of the war. My headquarters is a couch. My method is studying a crack in the plaster ceiling overhead. And I found out that's how she liked to work. She liked to lay on a couch. And debating with the only adversary I truly trust, Hannah versus Hannah. The abyss is real. Yes, but we are still in the world, but in a new place. How did we get here? Why? Yes, why? Tradition isn't just broken, it's shattered. It's had its head shaved, its soul crushed, its very existence marched into sealed chambers and exterminated. How can we still live? And she hears a voice. Hanashka! She thinks it's her husband. Blucher, I told you not to disturb me. Hanashka, up here! She looks up. What? A water stain on the ceiling over the couch in the shape of Walter Benjamin? Sholem always did say you were very visual. And you're talking? Uh-huh. So listen up. When a water stain in the shape of Walter Benjamin starts talking to you, you better pay attention. Go on. The reason you're not understanding why is because you're not free. You're a prisoner. But I'm just trying to do the philosopher's job, to find the truth behind the language, the origins of the shadows, to free us all, to understand all. There's the rub. Don't you get what Sholem and I found in the Zohar way back in the early 20s? What the hell am I arguing with a water stain? I knew what that whitefish salad at lunch tasted funny. Think of it like this. If you were the only person in the world, you would be able to predict the future perfectly. You think something, you do it, it's done. One tiny problem. You aren't alone. There are lots and lots of other people all over the place. And they're all saying different things and thinking different things and doing different things. It makes it kind of hard to predict the future now, no? When you get the sign, should you decide to act, you'll be tested. Your friends will ignore you. Let them go. Your enemies will attack you. Ignore them. But most harrowing, you'll come face to face with your captor. No matter what he says or does, and spoiler alert, it will be a he, you must not take your eyes off of his. Then you'll be free. Free to understand not just how the world collapses, but why. This test is imminent every second. The eternal ongoing present is the narrow portal through which the Messiah may enter at any time. In other words, Hanashka, pay attention. I didn't know you were religious. Mary McCarthy. So why does it matter what I do? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is dictators hate comics. They really do. So there's got to be something good about them. Another reason that I do it is that history is history. That's been sort of a leitmotif that we've been talking about here at the Academy over the past couple of months. And we try and figure out why. Well, the fault isn't in the stars. The fault really isn't with the dumbing down of the audience. The fault is with us, or actually, more specifically, with me. I've got to make better stories. And I thought back to one of my teachers, Hannah Arendt, and her quote that storytelling reveals meaning without committing the error of defining it. And I was saying this to somebody as I'm sitting drawing. Drawings really reveal meaning. We've got some amazing art around us in here. Drawings and art reveal meaning without committing the error of defining it, as does music. And then I thought back to those 30 years in the advertising business when it was like, make people like this toothpaste more than another. And there was an advertising guy with the unbelievable name of Howard Luck Gossage. Among other things, by the way, to launch, what's the Australian airline called? Qantas. To launch Qantas in America, he had them run a full-page ad in the newspaper that said, win a kangaroo. And he actually made a contest for someone to write in and win a kangaroo. Couldn't do it today, but he also started the Sierra Club as an ad. What did Gossage say? People don't read advertising. They read what's interesting. And sometimes it's an ad. And with all due respect to Mr. Gossage, I just said, people don't read history. They read what's interesting. And sometimes it's history. So how do I get there? I make sure I don't know how my story is going to end when I start making it. Even if I'm writing about Abraham Lincoln or Babe Ruth or somebody that we really all know about. Because if I know what my story means before I start writing it, I'm not writing history anymore. I'm writing propaganda. I go back to Sam Gross and I teach myself, because cartoonists know everything, even though I had to hire a physics tutor at a pretty expensive rate to teach. I think I broke his mind. It was sad. Next, stop accounting. But anyhow, I pose questions. In a Zoom meeting just the other week, no less a cultural historian, critic, and biographer than David Thompson, who writes amazingly about film, but also wrote a great biography of David O. Selznick. I'm behind. In a Zoom meeting the other week, no less a cultural historian, critic, and biographer than David Thompson said, "It's all fair game as long as you get to know the person." I think that's important. So why does this matter to me? Well, if I could see the future, I would go there, but I can't. Thankfully, the past is out there. And that's where I hang out. My goal? It's to tell old stories in new ways and new stories in old ways. In a way, I'm trying to predict the past and remember the future. I know that sounds weird, but it kind of works. To make bande dessinée that gloriously, impetuously, and responsibly vulgarize history, and to keep vulgarizing my observations on life and truth until the entire world runs out of ink. Thank you very much.
I have a couple stalling questions while people come up with their own questions. Over the next couple minutes. We did kind of rehearse these questions, so there's no gotchas here. The first one is sort of banal. Let's make sure our tech works.
It will.
Okay. A sort of banal question. The New Yorker cartoons, which I think probably everyone in this room has read, many of them over the years. Do these spring from the Krimstein brain whole cloth, or are these a laborious process of sketching out, crossing out, garbage binning, starting again, or is each one different?
There was only one time in my life that a cartoon sprung into my head full cloth. And it was the first cartoon that I ever sold to the New Yorker. And I thought, boy, this is going to be easy. That never happened again. So sometimes I work on a cartoon for years. In fact, I'm going to share with you a cartoon that I've been working on for years. And actually being here in Berlin has helped me a little bit. So something that I learned from Sam, or from Sam's mentor or person, Charles Adams, was that this is a foundational truth. We want to subvert the cliche. Cliches work, but you got to turn them on their head. So, whoops. We'll take that. I usually draw on paper, but this is good for this. So I had an idea many, many years ago that I thought was very funny. So what's the cliche? You'll know it when you see it. So we see a guy with a backpack and a hat, and he's climbing, and he's gotten to the ledge of a mountain. And what's a guy always see when he's climbing and gets to the ledge of a mountain? A guru sitting in a cave. And the guru, what is he going to ask the guru? What is the meaning of life? Therein is the cliche. So I was starting to think, I know there's a funny cartoon in there. So I had an idea, and then I kind of he's got to be talking. And of course, he needs to have his cane. And he's sitting there. And you can see how this was inspired by Berlin. He says, life is a cabaret, old chum. But then I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, I don't know. Maybe that's too much. Oops. Maybe just the hat, maybe the cane doesn't have to go out there. And he's in the typical now guru clothes. He needs a guru beard. And he just had, and this guy's like looking at him like, what? And he's thinking, oh, I usually put like beads on him. Now he looks like Abe Lincoln, so that doesn't work. And it seems really dumb. So, sorry. He just becomes the guru. World's worst turban. And now life is a cabaret, old chum. Now it sort of seems like a little funnier to me. And this is what you have to do. You have to just keep sort of playing with it. So this is, I think this is 6 years. And now I got a little chuckle. So maybe I have gotten somewhere with it. And if this does sell, I will split the $25.75 I get. Each of you will get some of that. Okay.
Great. But wasn't there a variety of this cartoon that actually was published at some point?
There have been about 100 of them.
Okay.
Not by me.
I was going to say, were any of them yours?
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean, desert islands, people
Dog
at a
and ball.
cough. Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, you want to take a fresh twist on something that's familiar.
Yeah.
And the pictures help. You could see even by what I was doing, because the pictures add a certain amount of content.
So another question that we sort of discussed in advance was, graphic novels lend themselves to all kinds of different stories or narratives, but somehow you have gravitated towards biography. That's not preordained. That comes out from some other interest that you had.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious to know, and I think the audience would be too, why biography? What led you there?
Yeah. So it's always a combination of sort of necessity, contingency, and desire. So I always liked history. I liked comics. I liked gag cartoons. That's why The New Yorker was my first mountain that I wanted to climb, because of Charles Addams. But when I was a kid, I didn't even know what these questions were going to be. And amazingly, I have this with me. I inherited from my dad's cousin a stack of comics. Now, I liked superhero comics or Men in Tights comics as much as the next person, although I was more of a DC guy than a Marvel guy, sorry. But I inherited these ancient comics, and they were nonfiction, published by Classics Illustrated. And they were on such riveting subjects as the Crusades. I didn't even know there was a thing called the Crusades. And they had a whole thing in here on the Children's Crusade. Now, I was a child, and I thought, wow, that'd be cool. We get into like armor, and we're children. We get to go fight like knights. I was really dumb. as I reread it, it got better. But here were some of the other ones that they had. And this was edited, actually, I found out subsequently a few years ago, by an incredible woman named Roberta Strauss-Freulich, who went on to become quite a important historian. It always was. So here was another one that kind of struck me. Time and space. I think that appealed to me when I was a little older. Oh, look. Here he is, Albert, the great scientist. And the one I think that I really, really loved was Famous Teens, featuring that teen we all love, Joan of Arc. I guess she was a teen. But actually, when you got into the stories, they were really, some of them were really beautiful. And Strauss-Freulich worked in. Now, this is America in the 50s. These were old when I got them. But she worked in stuff like about African-American contributions to the Revolutionary War, Native Americans. All her stuff was very progressively done. And, as a kid, you got to see stuff more than just Superman. So I love that.
And were there specific figures of history that were more interesting than others as you were plowing through these magazines over time? Did you?
Well, I mean, these were all pretty dated. There was one on World War II that I really liked. I mean, the stuff was real, but as I got older, I became obsessed with the Beatles, and I think I've read almost every Beatles biography that there is. And I like to start. I had a question, which is like, where in people's lives does this genius come from? So I had to visit Liverpool, and I had to go to strawberry fields and all that. And I'm still wondering about that. So the way that I approach it with pictures and words is I can show these sort of ordinary things like geography. Like, for instance, in the Einstein book, I found out that the summer of 1911 and 1912 was the hottest summer ever on record in the world. People actually were dying, killing themselves, whatever. And and I found out that there were fans, primitive fans, but actually that summer, a man named, I think his name was Joseph Carrier, invented the air conditioner. Thank goodness, which changed the world. But these guys were in Prague with smelly, awful, no plumbing type stuff in the hottest summer ever. So that impacted, I think, what they were thinking. So as I learn these kinds of things, because right now we're all in this room and it's a little bit warm. It's not super warm, but we're all together in this place at this moment. And that's why I find that the combination of pictures and words can add that extra dimension.
Great. Okay, we'll open it up. Do we have any daring Christian? Here comes the microphone.
Ken, you're a wonderful artist and a wonderful storyteller. What if you didn't have one of those components? If you weren't great at art, do you think you'd still be a storyteller of some kind? Or if you weren't a great storyteller, would you still draw? Or is it is there something about the combo of the two?
I have done just writing alone, and I really like it. I do painting. I do actual art painting, and I really like that. But I think, I tried writing. I thought, oh, my next book, I'm going to write a novel. I couldn't do it. And, I'm just very comfortable using visual and verbal together because it has this, talk about accounting. It actually it has this equation that I really believe in, which is 1 + 1 = 3. I mean, I could be a Bernie Madoff type accountant, I guess, but what it means is you've got to leave space. So if I show a picture, if I just illustrate what I'm showing, it's boring. But if I pull something out of it, you guys get it. People get it. You know, there's a scene in the Einstein, spoiler alert, where his adversary starts dancing and whirling around and singing crazy nonsense. I loved it. Somehow it got into the book. The editor liked it, and people like it. So that's my terra firma.
We have another related question. Is the one-panel cartoon the hardest to get right?
It's the hardest to sell. And it is super hard to get right. I mean, I think that's almost like, that's the high wire act of cartooning. And it's amazing how many, everybody from, Jim Henson was a single panel cartoonist. John Updike, not a particularly successful one. He went into writing. Perlman did single panel cartoons. I love single panel cartoons. Sam Gross was the master of single panel cartoons. You might remember his cartoon of a frog, rolling out with his legs cut off and 2 irons on his hands in a fancy restaurant. And this couple is like shocked looking, and the sign says, "Try our frog's legs," and the frog's looking pathetic. So, I mean, I think when you pull off a single panel cartoon, but I think what I try to do in these longer ones is give it the same amount of interest, just over a longer arc. And when you look at some of the work that has been done in the bande dessinée field, like Mouse, like Persepolis, and so many other works, we have some artists here who are doing them. This is why I feel that this category is just ripe for storytelling. I mean, somebody had a good point. It's like movies, documentary movies are really good. Like, there are a lot of really good ones, but unless you want to be a real nerd, you don't stop it and rewind it. And, these things, you can just linger over a page. You can go back. There's no right or wrong way to read it.
Any other questions from the room? I have another one here, way at the back there.
Hello. I was wondering if, with the panel transitions, how do you kind of make sure that it makes sense? Because when I'm doing it, I know it, so it makes sense to me. But I'm kind of scared that someone else, if they read it, it won't be as complete.
I take it, I can't see you, but I take it you're a comic artist?
Trying to be.
Yeah. And have you shown the comics that you've done to other people?
Yeah, I had mixed reactions.
Well, how do I know? I mean, a lot of it is taking stuff out. And actually, I find that usually I'll write a draft and I'll sketch it. And then when I marry the two things together, I see that I don't have to say as much because I'm showing it. So I find that really less is more, and lean on the visuals. Lately what I'm doing is I think the eye is our most sensitive organ. And all you have to do is think about, if you're out in Mitte and someone is 5 blocks away and they're the size of 1 pixel, you still know who they are. So I think lean on the visuals first, get the visual flow, and then worry about the words, I would suggest. And, the other thing I would say is a lot of times, my books, like the Hannah Arendt book, when it came out, there's a wonderful, and I love this, there's a wonderful comic store in Chicago called Quimby's. And the book was starting to sell, and I went into Quimby's and I said, "Oh yeah, I've got the book." And they had it, and I said, "Can you believe some people read this and they say they've never read a comic before? They never read a graphic novel, bande dessinée before?" And the woman behind the counter at Quimby said, "I don't want to know about those people." But strangely, a lot of people who've never read one, they're like, how do you read it? Well, you just sort of start in the top and you just read. People get it. So I would suggest go for it. Weirder works. Here's a question.
Thanks. That was a wonderful presentation,
Thank you.
Ken. You made a robust defense of vulgarization, which vulgarisation, and you argue really persuasively for the ways in which the graphic novel or the BD offers a more visceral or accessible encounter with the past. But I'm wondering, in what other ways do you think this form shapes our understanding of history? What are the other advantages besides vulgarization?
Yeah.
Besides rendering something more accessible or visceral?
Well, if it's done well, and if it's done, it shows us new ways to see things, like all art can do. So, I'm a bit of a snob when it comes to art on things. And there's certain people that just go into what I would call sort of prefabricated, this is what people look like, and I can tell. And God help me, sometimes maybe it's even AI generating it. I'm not interested in that because it's not showing me a new way to see. When I read Maus, I saw the world in a new way. When I read some of the books we were talking about, Dominique Joblet, when I read her stuff, I'm like, wow, that's how you see the world. So that I think it can do, and I think there are many, many more. I mean, when I saw, like, there are examples of graphic bande dessinée story. I mean, you could argue that the frieze of the Parthenon is the first bande dessinée, especially if you saw it in the way that it was originally done with garish colors. And we like to, oh no, it didn't have garish colors. Everybody was white. No, they weren't. They were painted like frickin' sideshow carnival people because they were telling stories. I do think, just like great documentaries or things like that, you learn something that you didn't know and you change the person. That's my goal. That's why I say make better stories. People don't want to read about Hannah Arendt. People want to read about a heroic woman who had an incredible life and a lot of misfortune and turned it into some really interesting thinking.
Thanks, Ken. So that was great. Your last comment actually presaged where I wanted to go, which is, how do you choose your subjects? And because you tend toward the difficult and the dark areas. I mean, totalitarianism and the struggle when you're unknown, as Kafka and Einstein were. So I'm curious, not why biography, but you can talk about that, but specifically why these people. And you mentioned something like Babe Ruth, and you mentioned the Beatles, but you're not doing Babe Ruth or the Beatles. You're doing these particular characters.
Well, thank you. That's a good question, and I think they're boring. And I'm sure Babe Ruth isn't boring. And if I was to do a book on Babe Ruth, I would try and find out the stuff about Babe Ruth that wasn't boring, that we don't all know. I mean, I say I like to scrape the barnacles off of history. I want you to look at stuff fresh because these were people. I mean, Kafka did not know he was Kafkaesque when he was in. he just was Kafka, and we tend to look at the past through the lens of where we are now, and that doesn't seem fair. So I look at people that maybe have accomplished things of note, although after having read Stoner the other day, maybe you don't even have to do that. But even Stoner was like a heroic life. And I think, that is interesting. That's what I'm looking for. And it's difficult because it also has to then meet the market. Like, you can't do somebody too obscure, or at least I can't. But I'm looking for attention. One of the things that I we were talking about this before. I think storytelling is, where somebody has to do something and they can't do it. It's must and cannot. And that is what really, really interests me. And I think Hannah Arendt had to do that. I come up with a question as I'm working on it. Like, the question for Hannah Arendt was, why did arguably the greatest philosopher, even though she didn't want to call herself a philosopher of the 20th century, deny philosophy? I mean, it would be like, why would the greatest baseball player just quit at the top of their career? So with Einstein, what were the fears? I was saying this to somebody tonight. I was talking not to the physicist that I had to pay, but one who actually gave me free information. It was like the head of the physics department at the University of Chicago. And we were talking, and I said, because in the book, spoiler alert, Einstein has an adversary called Max Abraham. And Abraham is a fascinating character, as are all of them. And I said to this guy, have you ever heard of Max Abraham? He goes, no, who was he? I go, well, he was Einstein's adversary. He was on Einstein's tail. He said, yeah, but he got it wrong. We typically don't look at people who got stuff wrong. And I do.
We are in the realm of plot. So I'm going to ask Agnes for her question, please.
Well, first of all, of course, to me, since I'm a literature scholar, neither Kafka nor Hannah Arendt are boring. I just wanted to say that.
Oh, they're not boring.
No, I know. But I actually also do have a question, and it sounds a little glib, but I don't mean it that way. And that is, you refer to Hannah Arendt as Hannah, and you refer to Franz Kafka as Kafka. So why is it not Franz and Arendt?
That's a really good question. You got me.
There's wine afterwards. So
I mean, Arendt, first of all, I'm very uncomfortable pronouncing that word in German. I happen to know that I don't do it right. But Arendt. Kafka, people called him Frank. A lot of his friends called him Frank too. And I just don't see him. Don't know. It's a good question.
we have
I
time.
can change that.
I'm trying to help you get out of this.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question. I think Gideon Rose had his hand up. Maybe that's the last one.
Hi, Ken. Great talk. Do you write for yourself or for an audience? And if so, what's the audience?
Okay. I sometimes write for members of my family who aren't particularly into this stuff. And I think if I can get them to like it, then I'm doing all right. No names will be named. I write for an ideal human, which is somebody who went to school, got at least C's, kind of can read some things, maybe works as a plumber. I don't know. I mean, I try to write for everybody who's latently smart or human. But also, I have to say, Gideon, at the end, of course, I write for myself. I mean, there was a great story. I heard from actually the late George Booth. His daughter was doing a talk with him, and she said we could always tell when George was, he'd go to the back. You all remember George Booth, the great cartoonist, did all those weird dogs and things, and is that we could always tell when George was doing good because we'd hear cackling laughter coming from across. So I guess at the, I don't know if Alex will say, but if I'm laughing or I'm into it or crying, I do feel that this medium, and it can allow you to do things that are not funny. That, right now, as I'm preparing to do this new work, thanks to the wonderful library here at the American Academy, I got to go to the J.F. Kennedy Library and to the stacks, and I just was pulling books. They have an incredible graphic novel. What were some of the books that I was pulling that are influencing me? Everything from the new Charles Burns book called Final Cut, which is incredible, to the first 5 volumes of Archie at Riverdale High School, because they all work.
A round of applause, please, for Ken Krimstein.
Thank you.